Welcome to Previously on X-Men, the podcast that looks back on X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. You can find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com, where we have a forum for you to share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. And please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Eric Mickles, known online as Dust vs. Tweak, and with me is Hilary Gunning.
Hello.
Hilary, today we are talking about the 2003 film X2, X-Men United.
I like when we do the movies because it's easier to research.
Also, you're an editor. Should I be saying 2003 or just 2003?
I don't edit,
numbers.
Speech?
Okay. Just in case, we are going to spoil this film. If you haven't seen this movie once in the 16 years that it's been out, do that first. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to our previously on X episode where we talk about the first film.
The first movie.
What is that? That's like a third episode.
Keep calling X-Men 2000.
I call it X-Men 2000 because then I'm just not gonna. I don't want to just say and an X-Men because that could mean anything.
X-Men, the first movie from the year 2000.
If I say X-Men the first movie, I think Pokemon the first movie.
You say X-Men 2000, and I think there's some new anime.
I know, yeah.
Well, they're in the future.
You know what? There is a Pokemon movie called Pokemon 2000.
Yeah.
So both of those were screwed. Right. All right, I'll call the first one X-Men: The First Avenger 2000.
Okay.
So work on a second X-Men film started almost immediately after the first film, if you can believe it. This was mainly due because of the first film making a lot more money than I think they were expecting.
I actually am kind of surprised that they were filmed so close together. I mean, it's not, strikingly different, but it doesn't feel super cohesive.
They use different cameras. They use different camera technology in the second movie.
And I was detecting that with my astute visual...
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, they use different cameras, and they have a lot more money this time around.
And a lot more hair.
Whose hair are we talking about here?
All of them.
Yeah. So the budget this time around is like 110, 125 million, which is different to the 75 million near the end, but they had to also use to rush the film out.
Oh yeah.
So they got to use it a little bit better this time around. Also because a lot of the first film, X-Men 2000, if you will,
X-Men 2000
was a setup for a sequel. So because I commented how the first X-Men movie is very much like a pilot.
Yeah.
So you could tell that even while making the first film, they're like, we got to make X-Men 2.
Yeah, that's true. It does stand alone a little more than this one. This one feels hardcore, like a middle movie.
Zach Penn and David Hayter wrote the original script for X-Men 2, which was rewritten a little bit by Michael Dougherty and Dan Harris, two names I don't recognize. Zach Penn would later go on to do The Incredible Hulk for the MCU, and David Hayter was an original writer on the first film.
Incredible Hulk, is that the one with...
Incredible Hulk is the Ed Norton Hulk film. Zach Penn did that one. And also X-Men 3 as well. But we'll get on to that sometime. Bryan Singer returned to direct, this time wanting to focus more on the human threat, after the first film was mostly good mutants versus bad mutants.
And Bryan Singer is or is not a monster?
Bryan Singer's a monster.
Okay. I can't keep track anymore.
The Bryan Singer, what would you call it now? The people of Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer's people have not confirmed the monster nature of Bryan Singer, but it's all but confirmed.
All right, cool.
Even before the recent year or two, there's always been stuff swirling about him, which is too bad because when you combine it with Bryan Singer, the guy who Brett Ratner, about 5 of the X-Men films are filmed by monsters.
Monsters. Cool.
So there were plans in this movie to have the legacy virus, but that was dropped.
There's something about the legacy virus that appeals to me.
The legacy virus, for those who don't know, is a virus that only affects mutants, and it is fatal, and it was a long-running comic book thread for a while. A few mutants did die in the comics from just contracting the legacy virus. And I remember that also being kind of thought of for the third film, which I guess we'll talk about when we cover that movie. But instead of using the legacy virus, the movie would be heavily based on Chris Claremont's and Brett Anderson's God Loves, Man Kills X-Men graphic novel. In the 80s, Marvel started producing standalone graphic novels, and this was the 5th one. And it's pretty good. I got it over there. So
Right over there?
Yeah, right over there, right in my bookcase. But Reverend William Stryker was changed to Colonel William Stryker. And Lady Deathstrike was added to the story by Singer, who felt that the movie needed another kick-ass mutants. His words, I believe.
Interesting.
I found.
I have thoughts about their use of Lady Deathstrike.
Angel and Beast were both set to appear, but were cut due to there being too many characters.
Wait.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted to add Lady Deathstrike because there weren't enough characters, but they didn't have Angel and Beast because there were too many characters.
There were too many I think Angel and Beast were added after Deathstrike and Stryker. So they were already creating too many characters.
All right.
Because the film also adds a few others besides Stryker and Deathstrike. Angel would have been an experiment of Stryker's, taking on his Archangel appearance, which I think is frustrating, and we'll talk about this when we cover both X-Men 3 and Dark Phoenix, but Archangel and Dark Phoenix, you have to have Angel and Phoenix before you can have their Dark...
Well, I don't think that they were planning ahead.
No, they weren't. But you can still see some Angel X-rays in the Alkali Lake base when Wolverine finds his birthing pod.
I think that's an interesting idea to have him become Archangel in that way. I think it's a weird thing to just, like, get rid of his regular story this early.
Yeah. Tyler Mane was going to reprise the role of Sabretooth, but that was cut. The Danger Room and the Sentinels were both planned but dropped. There is a door in this film that has a small label that says Danger Room.
I feel like these would have solved a lot of my problems with this movie.
Well, the Sentinels wouldn't have been a big role. I'm pretty sure when the Stryker and his soldiers invade the mansion and go down into the basement, they would have had a Sentinel come and open the door. Okay. So I don't think it would have been like the towering Sentinels.
Yeah, all right.
So, all right. Most of the original cast returns, except for Toad, Ray Park as Toad, and Tyler Mane as Sabretooth. But everybody else from the first movie is basically back. But now we have Brian Cox as William Stryker. He was cast because Bryan Singer enjoyed his performance in the film Manhunter.
I have not seen it.
Manhunter is a Hannibal Lecter film. He plays Hannibal Lecter in that.
Really?
This was before Silence of the Lambs, and they remade Manhunter, called it Red Dragon, with Edward Norton.
Really?
There you go.
It all connects.
Neil Patrick Harris auditioned for the role of Nightcrawler.
Neil Patrick Harris?
Neil Patrick Harris.
See, I might have liked that better.
Oh, boy.
Although it's different because who is it that's
Alan Cumming.
Alan Cumming. He can do comedy.
Yeah. Everybody remembers him in Son of the Mask.
Doesn't do that. What?
He was in Son of the Mask.
He was?
Yeah.
Everybody remembers.
Aaron Stanford was cast as Pyro due to his performance in the film Tadpole, a film I have no idea about at all.
Apparently, he was great.
John Ottman was brought on as the composer, so he composed the new score, and he edited the film. He's a double threat.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know what the third thing you would have to do to be the third threat.
Well, we'll figure it out.
The movie was released May 2nd, 2003, or 2003, depending on what Hilary has decided. And the movie made $407 million worldwide. So that doesn't sound like too much, but if you go to Box Office Mojo, you can find X-Men 2's domestic gross, which is $214 million. But when you adjust that for inflation, it actually becomes $321 million.
By the end of this podcast, I will have any
concept of inflation. No,
of
I don't understand inflation.
Well, it's not just the inflation. It's any of the stuff about how much they make and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a lot of money.
So that means X-Men 2 technically is only like in 6th place for the X-Men movies, but once you adjust them for inflation, it's the third highest grossing X-Men film. Huh. So it made about $100 million more than the original, like worldwide.
That makes sense. I could see it. I could see it, benefiting from the first one's popularity.
I guess we should talk about our history with this film, because I don't know if you remember, there was a huge amount of hype for X-Men 2.
Yes, I do remember
X-Men
that.
1 came out, and I think a lot of people, not me because I was only learning about X-Men at the time,
right.
but I think the general idea was like cautiousness. A lot of people were upset from just seeing the costumes. I think online that got a lot of ribbing, and I think it was kind of like it made money, but it was still kind of almost a sleeper hit when you compare it to like other superhero movies.
Yeah, I could see that.
Whereas X-Men 2 was nothing but build up.
Yeah, well, I think 2 is the one early in the podcast I mentioned the website for the movies, and I think X2 was the one that had a really purposeful, like, rolled out deal for the website.
Well, so I mean, with X-Men 2 coming out, Hugh Jackman has now had 3 years to become a star post the first movie, and he's been in other stuff, so now people like Hugh Jackman. And they also liked the characters, and we only got to see them in that first movie. And this movie just looked bigger.
Yeah.
And the only other movie, big superhero movie that had come out between the first one and X-Men 2 was the first Spider-Man. So we were still just like, big superhero movies.
Right,
This is... And a lot of people forget this, but X-Men 2 started a thing that didn't stop until Iron Man 2, where comic book superhero sequels were bigger and in a lot of ways better than the original films in terms of X-Men 2, Spider-Man 2, Dark Knight, and Hellboy 2 were all like, they became movies that like you felt the directors wanted to make the first time around. And then Iron Man 2 was kind of like, no, that's not how we want to do things anymore.
Let's just flip this on its head.
But X-Men 2 kind of started that. You were definitely more excited for the first film when it was coming out.
Well,
because you were already an X-Men fan. And
more
I was
than
like,
you?
because I was taking my first steps.
Yes, I was very excited for the first movie.
Did you watch the trailer I sent you?
I did watch the trailer you sent me.
So
I remember it because when I was watching the movie last night, and there's the part where Bobby's mom says, "Have you tried not being a mutant?"
Yeah.
I know that line so well, and it must be because it was in the trailer. You see it 8,000 times.
So on X-Men 1.5, the DVD re-release that had special features, they also had like a quick... Bryan Singer gave this tour of the set of X-Men 2 to show you some stuff, and they had this quick little trailer that was basically the end of the first movie with Patrick Stewart and Magneto in the plastic prison talking about what would you do if they come to your home, and that was fine. I was like, that looks cool, but there was no special effects or anything. So cut to February. I'm in the theater to see the film Daredevil. Oh, well, I guess there was that. We also had Daredevil out. But anyways.
Well, in that case,
Daredevil. There'd been a huge blizzard. Nobody could really get out, but my mom still brought me and my sister to go see Daredevil.
Aww.
And I did not know this was going to happen, but I'm sitting there, and the trailer opens, and it's the cars. It's the blue Mazda RX-8 on there, and you hear, you have to understand, we thought Bobby was going to school for the gift, and I was like, what is this crap? But then it dawned on me, I'm like, I haven't seen this trailer. And if my sister Erin was here, she could tell you about how my leg basically started, like, bouncing and shaking to the point where she was afraid her chair was going to collapse.
Oh my word.
Because it was like, this looks... Because all I had seen was the X-Men brief clip they showed on there, which had nothing. And this one was like, here's all of the mutants. And so, like, Lady Deathstrike was there. You saw... It has this, like, kind of marching trailer music happening. So there's a brief glimpse of a Colossus armoring up. And it was just like, in the 3 years it took me from the first movie to here, I had already become a huge... Like, I was buying my own comics now. I had played video games. I had watched the animated series. So I was in it.
Yeah.
So now I was able to be excited for an X-Men film as a true, like, X-Men film. And I went home, and do you remember having to watch trailers on Apple trailers?
I don't think I used Apple.
No. Oh, okay. Well, it wasn't on iTunes. You had to go to Apple, the website, to watch movie trailers.
Oh, yeah.
And so you had to, like, download it or at least
load
it. So I would do that before school and then come home to a finished trailer.
Yep.
And after it loaded, that meant I was then sitting there watching it multiple times because it took me all day to load. And I downloaded a little counter for the computer that would count by the seconds.
Oh,
so
really?
I knew how many days and hours until the X-Men 2. I
had that.
Did you get that counter?
I did.
It's just this little app on your computer.
I forgot about that.
It looked like the communicator that they have a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my word, that's funny.
And I bought my tickets in advance for me, my friend, my sister, and my mom. Maybe somebody else, but I think I bought all our tickets in advance. And when we got to the theater, everybody had their ticket, but I couldn't find mine, and I almost had a heart attack. And I don't say that lightly.
Someone would have given you their ticket.
It was in my pocket, but I found it eventually.
Well, that's good.
But I was so stoked that when the movie started, and all you just hear is Patrick Stewart saying, like, mutants, there was a huge smile on my face. Yeah. And then that smile was there until the end of the movie. And so this was like... I mean, I guess it must have been... I can only think of how, like, the people who had seen Star Wars in theaters the first time and then going to see Empire Strikes Back. Just, like, that kind of, big event.
Yeah.
So I can't think of a movie like X-Men 2 that I had been more excited for other than like The Lost World as a kid. That in terms of like, I gotta go see it!
Yeah. When I first watched the movie, I was very, very, very excited for it because I loved the first one.
But you had the counter.
I had the counter.
You remember that trailer.
Yep.
Did the trailer get you excited?
I was excited for the movie.
Yeah.
I was excited for the movie.
Okay.
Then the movie happened.
X-Men 2, yep.
And I liked the movie the first time I saw it. I didn't love it. I remember very much that I did not like the Nightcrawler scene. Here's the thing.
You should have said that off air so I could have screamed into a pillow real quick.
Kill Eric with all of my comments.
No, it's fine.
The thing that I'm just going to tell you this. I'm just going to tell you this right off the bat. The things that I didn't like about the movie are largely action related. And you really like the action stuff.
I do like action stuff.
So this is where we're going to differ.
I do like the action, and I like the action when it's done. Like, this is the last movie that remembers Storm has other powers that isn't lightning.
Yeah.
And I think it actually comes down to Simon Kingbird. So we'll talk about that in the third one.
Well, see, that is interesting because there are things I like about the movie. And the Storm powers is an example of one of the things that I like about the movie.
Right.
And then there are things that I don't like about the movie.
Okay.
And I think I land on not really liking the movie.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean there aren't things that I do like about the movie.
That's all right.
With my history with it, I was hugely excited for it. Very excited. And I think I enjoyed it when I first watched it. Okay. Although there were things I didn't like.
Right. Okay. The crowd I saw it with on opening night was just so in it. They were just like laughing and clapping. Like this was back, people were clapping at scenes. The scene where Mystique breaks out of her bonds and beats up all of Stryker's men and then flips them off while sliding away. Everybody was laughing and clapping during that scene. So we'll do a quick story outline and then we'll just talk about different things about the movie.
Remind everybody about it.
The movie opens with a glowy person in the stars as we hear Patrick Stewart talking about mutation.
Yep, as he does.
That's supposed to be Phoenix in her form, in that star form. That's something that other movies will never do again. And then we go into like the head and there's the title sequence and everything. And it opens with the scene Hilary doesn't like, which is Nightcrawler breaking into the White House to kill the president because he's being mind controlled by William Stryker, who is trying to create a situation where the president gives him permission to invade the X-Men mansion, capture mutants. Mainly he wants Cerebro and Xavier so that he can use Xavier to power and Cerebro to connect with all of mutant kind and then kill them by thinking too hard, which Xavier
this is quite a plan.
He talks about. That's basically what happens. He captures Xavier, he gets Cerebro, they invade the mansion, Magneto gets out, and the X-Men have to unite and then stop him. Meanwhile, Wolverine is trying to piece together his origin, and other characters are also dealing with plot threads. Yeah. There's a lot of characters in this movie, and there's a lot of plot threads.
Yes.
And it's definitely a film that would have benefited from 2 other movies after this, which was the plan. They were going to do X-Men 3 and 4 back to back when Bryan Singer was going to direct it, but instead he went on to do Superman Returns, which really made nobody happy. I guess why my brain feels like it's twisted in knots over the Nightcrawler scene in you is because, to me, Nightcrawler in the opening in the White House is like one of the great superhero openings to me.
Part of it is intentional because he's being mind controlled. But it is very not like Nightcrawler as a character. Right. Which is, fine. Right. But that really colored it for me because I really like Nightcrawler.
But he's being mind controlled.
I know that.
Okay.
But it's still like my first impression of it. I didn't like. And then I thought that they really belabored his like wicked stuff and like he does something with the president's ear. He like whispers in his ear or like
he goes
yeah, something like that. Yeah. He like hisses. I don't know. Yeah. Everything was really unappealing about the presentation of him. And he's being mind controlled, so whatever, but I just don't like it. Okay.
I remember reading movie reviews about this movie afterwards, and people talking about how if you hadn't thought about teleportation being like a cool power before, the opening in the White House is going to change your mind.
It is excellently choreographed.
Yeah.
It's not a bad scene.
I think that kind of helps, though, in terms of when we meet Nightcrawler, we realize how different he is from the Nightcrawler
scene. Yeah, and then we meet him,
scene.
and he's still not the right Nightcrawler.
Well, no, this movie definitely focuses on the Nightcrawler that is a devout Catholic.
Which is very interesting, but is...
But the Nightcrawler in the comics, especially during the Claremont era, is very much a very swashbuckly, very happy-go-lucky... He's jovial, and he's like, look, how bad can life be for others if I look like me and I'm happy? Nightcrawler is very much like, it's the dichotomy of like looking the most like a mutant you can, but taking it all in stride and smiling.
And I think that's so inherent to his character, that it's a real weakness.
And the movie doesn't really do that. They play on the faith. There are moments where he's a bit more lighthearted.
Well, like he waves that one time when, well, I guess it's at the very end when he's facing the president, he kind of waves at him.
But the movies always take a somber thing.
Yeah,
and actually we
like...
never get the goofy, life is fun, I'm gonna have fun Nightcrawler, even when we see young Nightcrawler in other movies. So, and this is
he's always kind of quiet and meek.
Yeah. In the comics, Nightcrawler is like fuzzy. Everybody compares like his hair to being like velvet.
Yeah.
Like he's soft and fuzzy, and he's got like long hair and everything. In this movie, it's almost like Mystique, where they're like, right, he's blue, but that's not enough.
Right.
So he gives himself like these angelic tattoos that he has to carve into himself.
An intensely dark character.
I
mean, that's self-harm.
He's very...
That's flagellation.
Yeah, he's very old school Catholic in this movie. We talked about this in the last podcast on the movies, on the first movie, about how Jean is... Cyclops says it. Ever since Liberty Island, your powers have been off the charts.
Yeah.
And she's still... I kind of forgot, like in the first movie she's lift stuff, but I forgot in this movie how still like inherently... low scale her powers are.
They're still pretty low.
Like, even when she has to, like, go into Nightcrawler's mind, there's still... It seems like she's like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah,
and
she's very hesitant.
Yeah.
And she's... Yeah, it's low stakes kinds of stuff she does.
Yeah.
Until the end.
I don't know if Bryan Singer's original, like, plan for 3 would have had, like, a Phoenix transformation, like, before Dark Phoenix. If we would have seen, like, good Jean. I don't know. So... It's just weird. Let's talk about the new characters then. We have Nightcrawler, who you don't love. But he's not very comic booky.
It would have been a good opportunity to throw in some lightness.
Yeah.
Just to have him be the right character.
I think the only person who's allowed jokes in these movies is Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Mainly because he's supposed to be our way in. Yeah. And so he's supposed to be like, this short is stupid.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in this movie, we don't need that anymore.
Exactly.
So.
And they know, that they know it because of the hairstyles.
Yeah.
Like the first time you see Wolverine, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, his hair is very much up there, especially in the opening.
So it's very purposeful that they're like, okay, now we're going to go more like strictly like the comics.
Yeah.
So they could have done it that way.
Yeah. There's a lot of characters in the, like, Iceman should be a very jokey... Yes! Iceman is the, like, class clown, always making jokes. He's never that way in these movies. Yeah. He's Iceman and he's Bobby Drake in name only a lot.
Which, it makes sense for, like, the time. Because everything was very, like, kind of emo then. Well, to be cool.
It's the tone they're going for. Like, the tone they set up in the first movie, you're not going to get, like... you're not going to get Robert Downey Jr. style riffing in these movies yet. Hugh Jackman... Hugh Jackman in the first movie saying, like, what do they call you, Wheels, is, as big as they got.
Yeah.
And really, Wolverine still doesn't even do that much in these. So.
Yeah, this one he doesn't, especially.
But he's
much more intense Wolverine.
He's still the comedic character, and then there's also a lot of dark humor around Magneto and Mystique. Mystique gets more laughs, I think, and a lot of stuff she does in this. Pyro's new.
Yeah. Pyro, I think, is solid.
Yeah.
I think he's good. He's got a good attitude. His arc works well, where he's sort of a rebel, and then he kind of, like, actually goes villain. I think that's good.
Pyro gets a great scene where he's looking at, when they're at Iceman's family's house, because they're on the run, you get to see Pyro's looking at the pictures of Iceman's family, of Bobby's family, and there's like no words, nobody says like, oh, remind you of your family, blah. Right. It's just him looking at it, and in his face you can tell like he didn't have this, and he resents people who do, and that's a very like clear, quick scene.
Yeah, that's
and the first movie had that kind of stuff as well. Very like quick moments to give you
a lot of exposition with very, very little
Yeah. Pyro, again, also very different from how he is in the comics, because in the comics he's just a bad guy. Yeah. He's Brotherhood of Mutants, works with Mystique all the time, and in this one he's the broody teenager.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's perfect to put into that role. Yeah. He's like with the lighter and like just sitting back. It's just... Yeah. It's obvious.
That's the scene where he says, all those dangerous mutants you hear about on the news to the cops? Yeah. I used to quote that all the time. Anytime I found a lighter, I'm like, oh yeah.
I feel like that's a weak ending for that line. Because, like, if he had just said something simple, like, I'm one of them, I think that would have been good. But he says, I'm the worst one.
Yeah, well, he's a teenager.
Objectively not the worst one.
But if he's a teenager, he definitely thinks he's the worst one.
Yes, that's fine. But that's not really how they do the movie. Like, it's not supposed to... It's not...
I mean, fire's pretty bad. I'd hate to be burned.
It is, but he's not the worst mutant. And he's, like, a very beginner villain.
But if he's 16 or 17, you can't convince him.
That is a 16-year-old thing to say.
Yes, that is, yeah.
But...
Nobody understands me!
It's not a movie that's structured to be like, oh, this is the genuine teenage experience.
Yeah, that's true.
So it still stands out.
We also have Deathstrike. But before we No, I guess we'll tackle her because you said you had some comments.
I do. Well, okay. To start with, I've never liked Lady Deathstrike. I think she's
in the comics. Oh, I guess you haven't read her in the comics. Yeah.
I didn't like her in the show, and I don't know. She's just not.
Isn't she only in 2 episodes?
Interesting to me. Yeah, she's. I don't think I dislike her, but whenever she showed up, I would be like, I don't care. That's like a side note.
Okay.
Because, despite the fact that I never really cared about her. Her showing up in this strikes me, is a similar problem to what you pointed out about Mystique in the first movie.
Okay.
Because she's a character who has connections to the other characters in like the world of the X-Men, who has like a deep backstory, and she's used as a henchman.
Mystique gets a lot more character in this one.
In this one, but not in the first
one. Right, no, she's still very henchman-y in the first one, you're right.
So, it bothers me because, like, she could have just been anybody. Any random mutant.
Yeah.
And
in the
I thought it was a waste.
In the comics, she's connected to Wolverine in that I believe the adamantium bonding process is somehow connected to her father. And so he may have killed... I can't remember.
He and she had a romance in their past.
There was a romance in their past.
Before they were crazy
people. She wants revenge for the death of her father. She wants his adamantium.
Which is it is a nuanced one and an interesting one, having them, like, they were in love, then this thing happened, and now she hates him, and now she became a weapon in order to kill him, and, like, that's interesting. She's got a very interesting thing going on, and she... doesn't.
In the comics, too, she's just a human who's, like, replaced most of her body with cybernetics. Yeah. And so that kind of shows you how much she hates Wolverine, that she's willing to give up basically all of her humanity to get her revenge on him. In X-Men 2, she's basically a mutant with healing abilities who Stryker uses to do the adamantium bonding process with her fingernails instead.
Right.
Yeah, she only has one line like Mystique did in the first movie. Though it's not a character line. Mystique's line in the first movie is, people like you were the reason I was afraid to go to school as a child. Whereas this one, she just says, what are you doing here? To a Mystique clone
because, like,
form.
She has to have said something.
She also has, whereas the Wolverine Mystique fight in X-Men is fine. The fight between Wolverine and Deathstrike in this one is pretty brutal.
Yeah, there's a lot of stabbing, a lot of slashing.
But it's like fine slashing. Like when Wolverine cuts you, it's just like chunks of you are going to come out. But when she stabs you, it's just these like, it just seems so, especially when he gets his face and it's just these like very thin lines. That feels like it would be even worse. Like, no, just cut my arm off. Don't. And she's so much faster than him, and she's sort
of choreographed like a cat.
Yeah, she's very cat-like. Like, she stabs him with those like very fine claws, like so quickly, and it's filmed so fast, and it's just like, geez, I know he's healing, but that sucks. Yeah. She's so much more nimble. Like, she has that like cool little cyclone spin,
spinny thing,
and throws him up. That scene was like, I mean, especially back then when all we've had now was Spider-Man 1 and X-Men. It was like, this is what the movie's building to for me, like this fight. And it's funny now when I watch it, it's so quick. But
it is.
As growing up, I was like, this scene is so good, and I still think it's great, and I still think it's brutal, and I also think it's sad because she's being mind controlled.
Yeah.
And there's a brief moment when he
stabs
her with the adamantium fluid to basically fill her up with liquid adamantium. Yeah,
it's horrifying.
Which is a painful death. It's like coming out of her eyes. But there's a brief moment where you realize she's aware.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like...
You see he gets sad. Like he sees it and he's like...
Especially when it comes out, he's like, this sucks. And another way you could just see it is like, that could have been, there by the grace of God go I for Wolverine. Like, that should have been him, but he got out. Yeah. And it is kind of a bummer. At the other hand, in the comics, she's like a cold-blooded killer, so...
Yeah,
but
it's true.
Different
worlds. And you know what?
What?
It is it weakens her as a character, because at the very end, it is sad to see her realize what she has become or whatever, but it also makes her less of a character with agency, and she's just sort of this victim again. So it's not like comics where she's like determined to become this weapon for a specific purpose, and she will do whatever she has to do to achieve this goal, and she goes for it, and that's just it. And that's a very powerful direction for her.
Right.
In this case, she's just some chick who got manipulated by a man.
I was gonna say we should feel the same pity for like all the mutants that Stryker's dealing with because of
all of them who are
Jason, who is Mastermind in the comics, but is Stryker's son in the movie. But this viewing, I kind of realized, like, no. I think every other viewing I've ever had of this movie, I'm like, poor Jason. But this time I was like, oh, right, he did have his mom drill a hole in her head.
He's a legit psychopath.
Like, yeah, so he's... but at the same time, what Stryker's done to his own son is it's dehumanizing.
Tragic. It's all tragic. Yeah. That doesn't mean you need to...
This is one of those things... I don't know if this helps you understand me as an X-Men fan in terms of, like, what I like and don't like, but... Mastermind is his own character, sometimes with his own plans, but I mean, he's more famous for helping turn Jean into Dark Phoenix in the comics. And in this one, he's completely different. He's stuck in a wheelchair with a breathing apparatus. He's being controlled by Stryker.
Sort of manipulated.
Yeah, he's basically just a machine, but mainly because that's what Stryker turned him into. And I was just excited, like when they were like, my son Jason, I'm like, that's Mastermind! Like, that's all I needed with that stuff. And I think I said this with the first movie or something else, that because one of the first comics I ever read of the X-Men, besides the Claremont stuff, was Age of Apocalypse. I just kind of have this view that the X-Men translate into alternate universes a lot better than a lot of different characters, that you can do more with the X-Men and put them in different roles and everything. And so I just liked Mastermind being in this movie. It's one of those changes that, like, I don't mind so much.
I can see that. I understand that perspective. That was one that did bother me, but sort of as a collection with other things.
Yeah.
I think changing Stryker from Reverend to Colonel actually damages his character and his arc more than they probably thought. I think they put him in that role and thought, well, now we can make him military, and that brings in like the military complex with the government, and like that's a whole interesting thing, and it is. But having him be a military zealot is different from being a religious zealot,
right?
And it sets the stakes as a different kind of thing. I view Stryker, and I also view Mastermind as much more subtle storyline type characters. And putting them in this military backdrop, I feel like makes it sets like subtle storyline characters in ham-fisted storyline settings in a way that I don't like. It doesn't balance well for me, because I look at them and I expect certain things, and they're like, and we're gonna kill all the mutants,
right?
We're going to manipulate the president.
I mean, again, Stryker's very different from how he is in the comic. In the comics, he's very one and done, though I think Claremont brought him back when he was writing Extreme X-Men. And when this movie was coming out, I think they brought him back. Because I can't remember if he dies or not. It's been a while since I read God Loves, Man Kills. Stryker's motivation mainly being his son.
Yeah. Has
ruined his life.
Yeah.
And so in response, he's ruined his own life. And he blames Xavier for not curing his son.
So if he was some psycho living in a shed who orchestrated something to get Xavier and stuff like that, I would find much more interesting than having it be such a grand
Well, I think what Singer and the writers wanted to do is have it be more of a government thing. And
Yeah.
like, so Stryker, I guess they just fit him in there. There's other characters they could have used, but Stryker's probably like the bigger name comic wise, I guess.
I understand why they did. I just I don't think that it. I think they thought we can just fit him in this slot and he'll be a military zealot instead of a religious zealot and that'll work fine. Right. But I don't think it does, and I wish that they had done something more, like just used somebody else and just let it be a military thing. Let it be this guy isn't comfortable with mutants and so he's going to kill all the mutants. Like if that's the direction they wanted to go, I wish that they had gone very straightforward with it, rather than trying to mix in all the like crazy psychology with him and his son, which they don't really have the opportunity to fully explore because they're spending so much time on like explosions.
I think you can just see Jason in that scene where Xavier says like, William, this is your son.
He does
what have you done
a beautiful job.
Yeah.
I mean, everything out of Xavier's mouth is fabulously done. But I think that he's patching holes.
Well, that's the way these movies are. They're very much like, we got to get... Character development has to be quick in these films.
I don't mind it being quick. I just don't think it balances well in the way that they do it.
You get some cameos, especially during the mansion scene, but considering that, like, two characters were cut because there were too many characters, there actually aren't too many new characters.
Yeah. They have McCoy.
In a quick scene,
yeah. He's on the TV.
He's got terrible hair.
Yeah, he's like a crazy...
It's like he hasn't bathed in a while and it's all down his face. It's real gross. And so, but I guess it's weird. That's one of those things where you can't really connect the X-Men timeline like it should be.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, I guess you could be like, they just recast that as him and he's taking his serum that we find out about in Days of Future Past.
And then he like turns into a weird vagrant.
There's a lot of we have to fill in the fix that stuff for them.
You just got to accept a lot of that kind of thing.
I said that thing about Lady Deathstrike and the Wolverine fight being the thing everything built up for me, but that's not true. The scene I like we knew was going to happen going into the movie that I was excited for, which makes me a terrible person, is the invasion of the mansion.
That doesn't make you a terrible person.
It doesn't. But I was so excited to see, in terms of we get to see a few different mutants and their powers. We get to see Wolverine cut loose. I mean, we saw him fight Sabretooth twice in the first movie, but it was all very big and also not very effective because like they're not very bloody or anything. You see him. Every time Wolverine's claws go into Sabretooth, it's just a bunch of coats and hair. So it's like, did it hit him? And in this one, you get to see what happens the first shot of Wolverine taking out a guy is where the soldier's walking in to get Iceman, and Iceman doesn't see him, and Wolverine grabs him and stabs him into the fridge. And what kills me about that scene is when his claws pull out and the guy falls to the ground, you can see the claw marks in the fridge. And I remember being like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I like that you get to see his berserker in this.
I wrote a bunch of things about the mansion scene and I was writing this before the mansion scene happened because I had to go somewhere real quick. The line where the guy's about to go and Wolverine grabs him and it's like, you picked the wrong house, bub. It's just, that's like the fulfillment of Magneto asking, what are you afraid people coming into your house? And Wolverine's like, oh, you're in trouble. And for a while I was like, why are all these mutants running? They could take him out. But they do send in a lot of people.
Yeah, they do. And
as the scene goes on, more and more soldiers are going in. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and most of the kids aren't being trained at this point for combat.
Yeah, a lot of them are kids.
Ready to be scared.
Even if it was just Wolverine and Colossus beating up on these guys, eventually somebody would get killed. Even Wolverine might get stopped. The cameos. Siren's the girl who screams. Siren is the niece of Banshee from the comics. In this, she doesn't have any connection to him, but she's the girl who screams. Kitty Pryde wakes up. And
she screams for so long.
Yeah, my wife was asking me to turn it down. I was like, nope, that's not the point.
Suffer with her. We
see our second Kitty Pryde. We had one actress play her in the first movie. Now we see her again. She's smaller this time. She looks more like Ellen Page in this movie. Is gonna look than the first like tall redheaded girl. So she gets to like run through everything, which is great, but it's also just like, that's Kitty Pryde, do something more with her.
Yeah.
Colossus shows up, and which I just love. I love the way he just armors up.
His transformation's cool.
And just the way he punches them through a wall. And it kills me that these movies are limited by budget and also the writer-director preferences. Because I'm like, have him keep punching people through walls. Because I remember people laughing so much that I'm like, he could just keep doing that.
Yep.
When Wolverine sends the kids through the catacombs to escape, and Colossus is like, I can help you. He's like, help them, like, or help him.
Just keep helping.
The kids will be fine. You can keep punching them. I guess it's altruistic, but still. There's also the scene. Okay, there's 2 scenes. Oh, there's a bunch of scenes. Wolverine stabs a guy in the foot.
Oh,
and then knocks him down, which I was like, geez, that hurts.
What is it about that kind of thing? Like a foot. Someone stabs you in the foot, you're going to be fine. There's no problem. But there's something about it that's so much more...
No, because he's not getting his toes. He's getting, like, in the foot.
No, but I'm saying it's not like your gut or something.
No, but it would hurt.
You're not going to die from a foot wound.
You stab your toe, you step on a piece of glass.
Yeah.
Now imagine that's 3 adamantium claws.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's gross.
There's also the scene, I've always liked how it looks when Wolverine jumps off the balcony, stabs the guys, and then flips the other 2 guys over. Even though I'm like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense physically.
Yeah, that would take a lot of leverage.
But I've always still liked it, because it was just, I was like, he's just screaming and running through.
What's the one where he stabs him in the sides or something? Or
he goes through one guy and stabs him in the side and then runs off with him.
That stuck with me for quite a while. There's something I don't know.
It's the perfect kind of, like, setup for, like, let's see... I never understood, because in future movies, people are like, we want to see Wolverine's, like, berserker rage. I'm like, did you not just see him stab a bunch of...
He's very clearly, at least almost
He's
berserker,
not angry, but he's doing work.
Yeah.
And I've always loved his, like, you want to shoot me scene. They showed that on a commercial for my dream car, which was the Mazda RX-8, which is in this movie. It's not real. I mean, I guess it is my dream car. Even watching it, I was like, there it is. I know. But it was because it was the X-Men car. Yeah. It was the Mazda RX-8 from X-Men 2, Dark Blue. I wanted it so bad. I still do. If it showed up in my parking lot tomorrow, I'm like, this is great. It's probably not a good car. I think I even looked it up yesterday to find out it had, like, a bad engine that might be hard to fix.
Oh, so, great.
Whatever. Yeah. And we also get Iceman's Ice Wall, which is like the first time we see his power do anything big. Last time we see his power.
The interaction with Stryker and Wolverine in that moment is so weird.
It's hard to remember a time when we didn't either know Wolverine's origin or also we cared about his origin. But as this is coming out, like, he doesn't know. Yeah. We don't know what this origin's going to be. And so it's very much like, this is my chance to get my origin. I think they're going for they're going for a parental thing.
Yeah, exactly. But like, that doesn't... I don't know.
I had the comic book adaptation, and where Stryker says, you haven't aged a day, but for me, nature, and Wolverine's claws go back in. In the comics, I remember that being insinuated that that's like a keyword. That if he says that, Wolverine's claws retract. And in the movie, I don't think that's very clear at all.
That'd be super interesting.
The shot where Stryker puts his hand up to the ice, and Wolverine does too, I think is a great shot.
It's so tender. It's weird.
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say about that shot is that I like... that on Wolverine's end, it's that sort of stereotypical hands on the wall, like not touching thing, and it's sort of emotional. And then when you get to Stryker's side,
he doesn't care.
He's just feeling it and being like, "Oh, interesting. That's good. I like."
For
that.
Wolverine, this is like everything he's been looking for. Yeah. For Stryker, this is just an obstacle and he's not even here for Wolverine.
Right.
He doesn't care about Wolverine.
Yeah, he's just looking at the wall.
He doesn't know he was there. He's like, this is the last place I expected to find you. And so I think Wolverine, this is just kind of like, oh, this could be a happy accident. Again, it doesn't matter to him. I don't know when this started happening. It didn't happen the first time I watched it. It was much later. Maybe like as the 3rd movie was coming out, where there's a scene where the kids are screaming and running through the halls. And it gets me emotional, and I almost cry now when I watch it. Because the kids are afraid and screaming. I'm going to cry thinking about it. It kind of hammers home, like, for me anyway, why what's happening is terrible. Because these are kids who have probably already had to run before, and now they're at a place that they assume is safe, and they felt safe. And now, just one night, they wake up and it's not safe, and they have no idea what's going on.
It's terrible.
I need to move on. Right before the mansion scene, Xavier goes to meet Magneto, and we find out Magneto's been being like mind controlled as well to give Stryker information about the mansion and how Cerebro works and everything, because he wants to steal Cerebro.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, just having that super strong character from the beginning be so
weak.
Weak.
Yep. But Xavier goes there, and they get gassed. And this was a clip they showed at, like, talk show circuits. Like, as Patrick Stewart was going around, he's like, I brought a clip, and it was this scene. And there's the scene where, like, you know, the gas is coming in, Magneto's like, you should have killed me when you had the chance! And Xavier's like, Scott! Yeah. And then they would cut. And I'm like, I gotta see this movie. But what I like right after the scene is, like, Cyclops uses his blast on 2 guys. But then he also has to just, like, punch the living crap out of 2 other guards. And I like that. Yeah. Because it gives Cyclops this brief moment of, like, he can also be a badass.
Yeah, he doesn't just have to use the powers.
They ever wrote anything for him.
Yeah,
apparently,
that's true.
They filmed the scenes where Mastermind is trying to manipulate Xavier. And in one of the manipulations, Xavier rescues Scott. And the 2 of them break out and go to the mansion. So they wrote that because they wanted to give James Marsden more to do.
That would have been
But then
great.
they cut it out
that
for timing.
Been a good idea.
So it's too bad. Because even in these, like, brief scenes, James Marsden is still, like, when he has stuff to do, he's good. And you want more of it.
All they write for him is whining.
At the end, Jean is with Magneto and Mystique, but they get separated because Cyclops is now being controlled the same way Nightcrawler and Deathstrike were. Yeah. And he's attacking them, and he's attacking Jean, and she goes to fight him. And we see Cyclops use his optic blast, and Jean stops it. Yeah. Which, to a comic book fan or somebody else, we know that's impressive because he can, like, level a mountain with that blast. But I feel like to the movie viewer, it doesn't really mean as much. True. And if we had seen more Cyclops being cool, like, we know he can blast a roof in a train station, but is that a lot of force compared to what she can stop? I mean, that's the only time he really uses that power at all, and when he's mind controlled.
Like a full blast,
It's frustrating. You know what, though? Chris Claremont always had his characters getting mind controlled, and he loves that. So maybe maybe that works. There's some that I think benefit from being returned characters. Storm is one of them.
Storm, yes.
Apparently, and this will probably make you cranky, but some of the script had to be rewritten because they wanted to give Halle Berry more lines because she had just won her Oscar.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is the best she is in these movies. I think she peaks in this one, and then in the third one it's a little rough.
They show a good variety of her powers, which is nice.
It's crazy that in this movie they're like, Storm can create a blizzard, Storm can create a field of tornadoes, Storm can do all these other things, and then the other movie's like, she's the Emperor from Star Wars. She can shoot lightning, and that's it. Yeah. But the scene where they're flying the jet through the tornadoes is just so cool.
Yeah,
and
it's a good scene.
It just shows you, like, what a powerhouse Storm is, because previously we had only seen her shoot lightning at Toad.
Yeah.
So, like, this is just like she's still flying a jet. So this is just like she's just doing this almost in her sleep. Yeah. This is secondhand to Storm.
Which is Storm. I mean,
right.
That's very.
But the scene where Nightcrawler and her are rescuing Xavier, who's under Mastermind's control, and she chooses to get him out there. Like in upcoming movies, if this scene happened, she would just shoot lightning until they freed her. But in this, she's like, I'm just gonna lower the temperature and make it cold. And like,
creative.
That's a creative, subtle use of her power, and it's just so frustrating that doesn't stay, because she could rain down hail on people. And anyway.
She definitely benefits in this movie.
But I think her character also, like, is the best in this.
That's probably true.
I
get very distracted by her hair in this movie.
Yeah, everybody has different hair in these movies. I guess Cyclops isn't the most.
So fluffy and big.
And then it gets cut much shorter. Yeah. It's funny because she's a character famous for her long hair. Yeah. And they just keep shortening it through each movie. True. But there's the scene where, like, in the first movie, she talks about how she kind of hates humans because she's afraid of them. And in this one, she talks about how her anger can keep her alive.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And Nightcrawler, and that's where you kind of get, like, that idea of Nightcrawler, where he talks about his time in the circus, how people were afraid of him, but he didn't hate them. Yeah. He pitied them because a lot of people won't see beyond what they see with their eyes. And that's very much like, if he was more jovial, that would be like a perfect Nightcrawler moment. But between him and Storm, I think that's a good moment for both of them.
Yeah. They do something interesting with Storm in these movies in that regard, in that very specific regard, where you see her being very straightforward about being driven by anger, which is very unusual to see as acceptable, particularly from a female character, but at all, really, because, you know...
Especially for one of the good guys.
For one of the good guys. The X-Men, you should be, like, trying to reform the humans.
These X-Men, like, we learn in like, one of the opening scenes, we're at their museum, they're teachers.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're X-Men, but they're teachers.
That reminds me of my favorite part in this movie.
What?
when they're at Bobby's house.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, "What do you teach anyway?"
Yeah.
And Wolverine's like, "Art."
Wolverine, yeah.
And he's not even like being gruff about it.
Yeah.
He's like, "What? Say something."
Yeah.
I teach art.
I guess there's the scene for me where I was like, oh right, they're teachers is where Jean goes up to the boy who's playing with the saber-toothed cat. And she's like, come on, pay attention. I'm like, oh god.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a weird sell. Like, check out these teachers who are superheroes. Mystique is back, and she gets a lot more to do.
She does get more, yeah.
She gets more lines.
She's a little more like a spy or something.
Well, the scene where she's like seducing that security guard is pretty gross.
Oh, it's so gross.
But
I do think it's interesting that she's just Rebecca Romijn Stamos.
Yeah. Listen,
in the flesh.
If you have Rebecca Romijn Stamos,
yeah.
and you have a scene where it doesn't have to be blue painted Mystique, you're gonna pick Rebecca Romijn. I was in love with Rebecca Romijn Stamos. This time.
Mystique has a kinky side in these movies.
Yeah.
Because, like, she does that, and then, like, when she's with Wolverine, sexually manipulative.
Yeah.
It's, like, weird.
See, I've never thought about it until now, where she goes into the tent as Jean to get it on with Wolverine, but Wolverine should have known instantly, because he can smell.
Oh, yeah.
And instead he's like, oh, there's the scar.
That's always the thing with him and Mystique.
Yeah. Yeah, this Mystique is very much like, I want to get laid, and so she just goes off to try to get laid with Wolverine.
Yeah, she would
David
take the
Hayter,
opportunity.
In the commentary for this movie, David Hayter talks about how he felt they should have, because they're both like warrior characters, so why wouldn't these warrior characters just have this? But everybody was like, no, because he's in love with Jean, you dummy.
Well, and in that moment, it wouldn't have made any sense for him to just be like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And if Wolverine had been like, stay as Jean, it would have just been like, well, that's gross, Wolverine.
Gross.
She gets like a few cool scenes, specifically the one where she like beats the living crap out of all those guards and then flips them off. But we get to see that she's very like tech savvy on computers, and she breaks into the dam, and like I wouldn't know how to open a spillway, but she does. And Magneto in this is just you said to me before we started recording that you find him weird.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, here's my theory about Magneto in this movie.
Okay.
In the first movie, he's a very calm type character.
He's regal.
Yeah. In this movie, I feel like maybe because they had decided that they were going to have them team up, which is a very interesting thing to do.
The games do it. X-Men Legends 2 does that.
Maybe they had decided that, like, okay, so if he's not going to be actively fighting them, then he needs to be showing off his villainness.
Yeah.
And so he ends up being a lot more, like, mean, sort of petty and, like, goofy, like, kind of like a mean goofiness. He doesn't have any of the regalness anymore at all.
Well, the scene where he breaks out of the prison, the plastic prison, because Mystique injects the guy with liquid iron, I guess.
In his butt?
In his butt.
Up on a...
Well, because it goes in his blood.
How can it be both magnetic and not show up on a...
Well, I think it's just one of those things where it's in his blood, because...
It can't be in his blood. It's just inserted. She put it in his butt because that's the fatty area that can sustain a large amount of something.
Magneto says too much iron in your blood. I think we just have to accept that
she did not.
We didn't know
into his blood.
But anyway, the security guard has been injected with liquid iron by Mystique, and Magneto, who's been getting beat up by this guy with like basically a glass nightstick to the face. He's all bruised. This guard has been an a-hole the whole time, and Magneto's like, you're about to get it.
Yeah.
And he says, there's a problem. There's too much iron in your blood. And he just pulls out the iron from him. But then, so he makes these like ball bearings.
Yeah.
And just knocks down the prison with it. And the guard's like, oh crap, draw back the bridge. And he creates this iron platform.
Yeah.
Which he then stands on, and then like arms folded just kind of like glides across. I think that's very much like a regal. It's villainous, but it's still very like.
Yeah, I think that's what they're going for. I think it ends up looking a little goofy. Like if he had been walking like he does in the first movie and like having things in front of him.
But he doesn't have enough iron.
Because that's more like I'm doing something.
Right.
But just having him kind of be like, here I go, sailing across the expanse.
I think it shows you just like how. I mean, because he doesn't have as much metal as he did when he made that bridge.
I don't know. I just don't like the image.
Okay, well, disagree. I've always loved that scene as an example of like how little he needs to be
see that. I can see
threat.
That.
Like if he had a paperclip.
Because he's just chilling.
Right.
And he's not like putting effort in. He's just sailing across.
And this time was the first time I noticed this, and I think it's because it was the first time I watched it on Blu-ray. But there's a shot where we see in a reflection everybody being killed from the other side.
Yeah.
But this was the first time I saw Magneto's face so clearly, and he is smiling, and it is the creepiest smile.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't like as much because I don't see him as a happy revenge character. I see him as a vindicated character. Like I see him as like, this is what should be done. This is what's right. And I'm going to enact it, rather than like, ha ha ha, I've done it. Look at me go.
Right. He's been being abused by these people.
Yeah, it's more personal. It's more immediate and it's more personal.
He's definitely making it personal. In the same way like he was stretching... in the first movie, he's like stretching Wolverine's claws out of his fist. And like, he can be very like...
He can be cruel.
Right.
But I don't see him laughing about it.
Right.
And he does it later when he's making fun of Rogue with her hair... And he's laughing with Miss about it. And I just... That's such a weak bully type thing to do. And he just seems above that to me.
He's now been proven right. That humans are bad.
Yeah.
And that he's basically had to relive his like camp days in some ways again. And I think when you're talking about him being mean, he's being mean because to him, these X-Men are as naive as you can get. And like... If Xavier was there, he'd be different, and that he'd have this like respect and friendship. But when he's dealing with Wolverine, he's just like, "Look, you big dummy."
Well, that's fine,
right.
but picking on Rogue the way he does, I can definitely understand him having disdain for her, but treating her that way doesn't ring true for his character to me because I feel like he would be dismissive of her, or he would be like. Like, if she approached him and was like, look what you did to me, then he would just be like, well, whatever. We don't see him, like, reaching out to her and being like, haha, remember that horrible thing we did to you?
I think prison's just changed him. I think he's just been on the inside too long.
I guess.
I think it's just made him
like
a bit bad.
It's kind of a bit...
Real quick, the cameras. I said there are different cameras in this film. I can't remember what the type of cameras are. That you can research it because it's all very technical, and I was like, blah. But they use a different style of cameras, and they build a lot more sets. And to me, a lot more of this film, even set-wise, especially the Alkali Lake Dam base, a lot of it just feels more tactile and a lot more... It feels more detailed. And like when you're looking at like the base and everything, it all just feels very real.
Yeah.
And I think the movie benefits from that in terms of like the scenery and everything. It all just feels more... Like the film is bigger... The scope is bigger than the first movie. The world seems a little bit bigger, and I think that is helped by like the more tactile nation. And I've always thought that, and watching it in Blu-ray didn't really change that, which I thought it was going to.
It might fuzz it out.
Yeah, but even just like a lot of it, especially like the Cerebro Stryker makes to kill everybody with, it always struck me as very like. Concept art. Yeah. When you look at concept art, it's always like, oh, I wish they could make it look like this in the movie. And a lot of it actually does kind of feel.
That's a good point.
Like concept art made real.
There are two things that drive me crazy about Cerebro.
About Dark Cerebro?
Dark Cerebro.
Okay.
It is a very cool design. The fact that, first of all, Magneto moves a few panels around.
Yeah, I'm never entirely sure how he knows how to do it. I mean, he built it, but just looking around, he's like, oh, you've pushed...
giant panels that are what, like, controls this? And then, secondly, he didn't even need to do anything to Cerebro because he just has the guy change Xavier's directive. Like, if he was still telling Xavier, kill the mutants, but he had reoriented Cerebro in some way so that when he says kill the mutants, it means kill the humans. He does that... And then he has him say, kill the humans.
Probably contradict themselves a lot, too. But I think we're supposed to understand that, like, in one setting, he could kill the humans. And in the other setting, he can kill the mutants. And,
it's not enough. Like, it's not strong enough?
I don't know. That, like, one is just attuned to a certain frequency versus the other. But that's not really how Cerebro works.
Right. You see him access both groups.
Yeah. So I think in that scene, we're supposed to be like, he's switching it to focus on humans.
Right.
But
that's
yeah, I don't think that was a technical thing. There's the scene where he does that, and Mystique tricks Mastermind into having him now go after the humans. And there's no interaction between Xavier and Magneto, but Magneto's pretty good in that scene where he's, saying like, still fighting the good fight, doesn't look like they're playing by your rules anymore. And there's this brief scene where he says, "Goodbye, old friend." And I guess he thought, I always thought like he thinks Xavier's about to die.
Yeah.
But I never understand really how he would die, because he's only going to die because they start tearing apart the base. So I guess Magneto must know that the base is about to...
the idea that that's going to happen.
Yeah. It's a very subtle where he's like touching the chair and then walks away.
It could be that he genuinely thinks that now all of the humans are going to die, and once that happens, there will be no need for him to interact with Xavier anymore.
That's true too, yeah.
Something I thought about, connecting Xavier to Cerebro.
They're in love.
This is.
If that's what you're getting at.
There's a world in which this still works. Like it's not. So Mastermind has Xavier at a disadvantage. Fine, but then he connects him to Cerebro, which vastly augments his ability, and it sort of seems like at that point he would be strong enough to be like, oh wait, what's going on, and like change turn the tables on Mastermind, which doesn't happen at all. Like he's connected like very vastly to Cerebro, but he's still like under the spell, which like maybe that's just how it works. Like I can just say fine, he just does. But it seems like that would change things a little bit.
I think he becomes like a blind spot. Like, for him.
Yeah,
maybe.
I guess.
So, I don't know. I mean, if they know how Cerebro works, then they probably also know how Magneto's helmet works. So maybe something's going on with Mastermind. I mean, there's just so much wires in Mastermind. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see that being like he doesn't realize he's in there.
Yeah.
It would have helped, too, if they had, like, shown Xavier being like chemically induced, but he does say like, this won't work on you, your mind's too powerful. So I guess if you're just in a room with Mastermind, like on a certain level, that could be a thing.
How it works. And like he is a very powerful character.
Yeah,
it's just once he's connected to Cerebro that it surprises me.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to believe that he's just too in it.
He's too deep. That works.
I still like the scene where Wolverine goes into the, I don't know what his birthing pod almost. The scene where he goes into the chamber where he was given his bones, and you see all the claw marks and the skeletons on the screen, and the memories are coming in. Yeah, it's lost its potency in the fact that
you've seen it 1,000 times.
The fact that the other movies have either covered it or that it goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Because this Wolverine never actually discovers his origin. We, the audience, do. When we talk about origins, I'll complain about that a little bit. But it never, outside of Wolverine telling Stryker that he'll take his chances with the X-Men, finding about it, there's no real we never get closure with that in the third movie drops that completely. Doesn't care about Wolverine's origin at all. It's still like a well done scene. I just wish, like most things, the X-Men 2 is a film made up of unfulfilled promises to us, the viewer, and it's not X-Men 2's fault, but it is X-Men 2's problem in rewatches, and that there's scenes,
and there's so many threads, not even just like one thing. It's like the entire movie is
filled
like
with
the
threads.
Scene,
Magneto and Pyro going off. We see Jean dies under the water, and at the end, very last scene of the movie, we see the Phoenix flame form under the water. And Wolverine finds out maybe he chose to go into the procedure and all this stuff. And it's all stuff that we do not get back the way we should. And it's too bad, because I do like that scene. And watching it, it was very much like, oh man, what's it going to be? And then when we didn't get it, like, oh, not again! Stryker!
Yeah. Hit that relationship so hard.
And I think it's rough because there are so many characters with their own stuff going on. And I was thinking this time around that it's not as much the Wolverine and the X-Men movie that I remember it being. He's definitely the main character, if there is one. But it does seem a little bit more balanced as a team. But at the same time, his plot thread is interesting in terms of like, he's not an X-Men. He's still just hanging out with them. And he leaves them at one point to go find Stryker and find this room and everything. And he has to kind of make the choice if he's gonna find out his origin, or if he's gonna, stand with them and be an X-Men. And so like the scenes where he's like running to save them, and he tells Stryker, "I'll take my chances with the kid." It's like that's a good end of that character arc for the movie.
Yeah.
But the whole origin stuff just never gets landed in a satisfying way. Also, I wish the third movie has so many problems. I wonder if maybe they were gonna make Rogue a pilot. Like she was gonna become their pilot.
Yeah.
Because we see her flying and it's a big thing, but they don't like using her powers that much.
Give her. She does. They do give her a teeny bit
with pyro
of tactical use of her power.
Yeah.
So I like that, but it is a teeny bit.
And we see that a little bit in the third movie, in the Danger Room scene, but never the rest of the film. There's a scene where, at the end, so Jean has died. Her powers have been all out of control throughout the whole movie, getting stronger, and the dam is breaking, the jet can't fly, probably because Rogue broke it.
Yeah.
Nobody says that. Nobody's like, "Damn it, Rogue!" But she probably did. Yeah. She landed it pretty roughly.
Realistically.
And so Jean goes out and is lifting the plane up and turning it on and everything, but she's keeping everybody in the plane from saving her.
Yeah.
And she's stopping a huge wall of water.
Yeah.
And then she gets crushed.
Right.
And I've always thought that was a very, cool scene.
It's a very cool scene. I have a problem with it. I don't like that she is running the plane. Like, I understand that they need the plane to function. Otherwise, once she dies, it just falls into the water. So, practically speaking, when you're making the movie, the plane has to fly.
Right.
But it doesn't make sense for her to have to go outside of the plane unless she's going to lift the plane. If she just makes the plane work, then she can be on the plane.
I don't think it's necessarily explained why she might want to, but I think she wants to do this. Like, she wants to step out and see how strong and she is.
I get that.
The water doesn't overpower her. She closes her eyes and then lets the water through.
That's true.
So it is, I think my wife was confused by this too, and I think it is kind of a confusing scene, like, why can't she just do this in the plane?
And if they want her to be outside, just have her lift the plane.
But also, so she's being encompassed by fire and everything, and I think it's one of those scenes where, like, she wants to see if she's strong enough to do this.
Yeah.
But until, and maybe like the next movie had originally planned to do this, but with Jean in the comics, it's one of those things where, like, she's powerful and she's getting powerful, but until this, like, death rebirth thing, she isn't there yet. So I think this is almost like she wants to see, and she finds out she's not quite there yet, where she could lift a plane, stop the water, and survive it.
Yeah.
And it's, almost a failed experiment that she's accepting the results. And I don't know, maybe we're supposed to think she knows she's going to survive again.
Yeah.
The cocoon.
I guess when you're just looking at the character, like, just walking with Jean through the reasoning, I just, like, I can see her being like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to lift the plane. I'm going to stop the dam. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
But if she is thinking, I'm going to fly the plane, I just don't see why she would walk outside. Wouldn't she just be like, I can do this. I can do this. Here I go. I'm going to fly the plane. I'm going to stop the thing in the plane. But, like, it is a powerful image. Like, it's a powerful image to have her on the ground sacrificing herself. It just doesn't make sense.
The reason I brought this up is mainly because she dies.
Yeah.
As we're supposed to believe she dies. And they're mourning her back at the mansion. And they're talking about how she made a choice and everything.
Cyclops' reaction when she dies is just the worst.
But they're mourning her.
Don't do this.
And Xavier's saying, she made a choice and everything. And Cyclops kind of sighs and leaves. And Wolverine follows him. He's like, hey, she did make a choice. And it was you. And I'm like, that's a dick move.
Just so you know,
your dead wife
wondered about it.
Yeah, your dead wife, who we find out you're married to in this, chose to stay with you right before she died.
Yep.
So hey, that should help you sleep at night. I don't think the movie guys realize this, but in the comics, they don't get married until like the mid-90s. And so the Wolverine-Jean relationship, love triangle, is a little bit more interesting. Once you're saying, like, this is a married woman, and Wolverine's still, like, making out with her at the plane and everything.
Trying to seduce her.
And then even her line is like, don't make me do this. It's like, Wolverine, back off.
Stop.
And I don't think they realize, like, it's not as romantic or sexy as it is in the comics.
It's just creepy and, like, predatory.
And especially at the end, when he's like,
on who
hey, nerd, I made out with your wife, and now she's dead. But she chose to keep making out with you. Yep. So I gave her the option. Could have made out with a blue lady who looked like her.
She would have taken the option, but after a lot of thought, decided she'd stick with you.
Jean's monologue at the very end, like the scene with the phoenix flying, is Xavier's monologue from the very first movie.
Nick said, cool. My husband Nick said that it was like, I think he said Star Trek 5. I don't know if it actually is Star Trek 5, but the one where Spock dies.
That's 2.
Is it 2?
Yes. This movie's very Wrath of Khan. I wrote that down.
Wrath of Khan. He didn't say 5. He said Wrath of Khan.
No, your husband knows Star Trek too well to have said this was Star Trek 5.
Well, that's why when I said it, I was like, that doesn't make any sense.
So no, Wolverine's never like, what does the god need with a starship? Wrath of Khan, Hilary can confirm. I wrote it down.
You're right. Wrath of Khan is
the
written
movie
down.
is very much like that in terms of you have a villain who has a grudge against Xavier in this case, and you have like this father-son situation going on. The whole Jean's death to save them. You almost Xavier's almost like hers. She may have been a mutant, but her soul was the most human.
The most human.
Yeah. And so it's very structured like Wrath of Khan in a lot of ways. And I remember reading an interview, I think it was in Empire magazine, as this was coming out, and Singer was talking about how they looked at both like Empire Strikes Back and Wrath of Khan. Empire in terms of like splitting up the team, but Wrath of Khan, I think, in terms of like the personal journeys and everything. So there is Star Trek in there, and I think Singer's a big Star Trek fan, outside of being a horrible sex monster. It's too late now. I wrote Jumper because the Nightcrawler Bamf effect. The Nightcrawler Smokey effect, because it's Fox, and Fox likes reusing assets. In the movie Jumper with Hayden Christensen, they basically just use the Nightcrawler teleport effect.
That's
I remember that being like, oh, that's just the effect.
Here, while we're doing weird asides, I was watching X-Men: with my niece this afternoon, and Nightcrawler bamfs all the time, and it made me think, like, they've locked in the bamf sound across all of these different
properties,
movies, and I just think that's really interesting. Like, I wonder why it's that sound. Like, how do you pick that sound?
Bamf.
I mean, it's great.
Yeah,
it's a good sound.
Yeah. The other thing is, there is a forest in the first movie. The Fox X-Men films reused the Fox Forest in almost every film.
The Fox Forest?
Fox has like a forest that you'll find in a lot of X-Men films that like... and
they just have a forest.
Just Fox films. In a Fox genre film or not, there is more than likely going to be a forest scene.
That's
because
funny.
Fox has a forest.
They have a forest.
I mean, X-Files is Fox.
I was going to say.
So much forest.
Yeah. Well, that's all in...
This was also filmed in Vancouver.
Oh, that's something I wanted to say. Was there stuff filmed in Sydney, or is that a different one?
I think that's a different one.
Because I remember when I was a teenager, when I was first watching this, I had this in my head that they had filmed in Sydney, and then there's the cop at who comes to Bobby's house.
The boss with the Boston accent.
And is it Boston?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Oh, that's why you didn't get it. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, Bobby's family is in Boston, and the guy's like, "Put your hands in the air."
Yeah, it was like some extra that they had taken from the streets of Sydney.
But the first movie had them in the forest. The third movie will have a lot of forest scenes, and then you keep an eye out as we watch these movies. They're just going to end up in the forest when you think, well, they're not going to be in a forest today. They find ways.
They are.
Hilary, I got to tell you, I know we disagree on this, but for me, this is like an example of first film, second film. Like with X-Men 2, Spider-Man 2, and Dark Knight, it was just like comic book movies had to do their origin movie, and then the sequel was going to be even bigger and better.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love the first X-Men movie.
Yeah.
But for me, X-Men 2 becomes like the movie that, and I think it is the humanity versus the X-Men angle, and I think it's the mansion scene and, the subtext of that, and I think you still get some pretty heavy mutant on mutant action, even if it's just Deathstrike and Wolverine, but I still think the soap opera nature of it, but also the humanity threat, it becomes like the best example of maybe all the movies to show somebody who's like, I don't really know what the X-Men are about. I only know the name X-Men.
It encapsulates all
Yeah,
of it.
I think you could show them, and if they never experience X-Men beyond X-Men 2, they'll know very well like what the X-Men are about. They're bad mutants, they're good mutants, humanity's the real threat.
That could be true.
And there's a bunch of characters with their own histories and everything. And I think for me, it becomes that. And this is definitely, unless it changes in this rewatch, it's still my favorite of the X-Men films. But the top end X-Men films get very hard to rank. A lot of people like to pretend that the X-Men movies are generally bad, but when you have to pick like the top 3 X-Men films, it's like, I don't know, just you pick one.
Just all of them.
Yeah.
In response to what you were saying about the second one being a step up, I think that's true in certain ways. My perspective on it is the first movie is so tight. It's so, like, the acting is good and it's subtle, and the balance of the plot is really well done, and it's tight, and it stands on its own as a movie, not just a superhero movie, which I think is really impressive. And this movie, I think, is just all around bigger, and there are ways in which that's good. It does a good job in certain ways in that regard, but I miss the tightness. I miss it being like everything has a purpose, and it just like all holds together. And I like a smaller movie. I
think they become 2 different films. Whereas the first film, I said this in that episode, where the first film is very much like, I want to watch this show on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I want to watch this X-Men on a regular, whereas this one strikes me more of like a movie.
It's
and
a franchise movie.
Yeah, and I want to watch these movies more. And I would have liked had the X-Men series staying the course and getting more movies like X-Men 2.
Yeah.
Because it is still just frustrating. Like, I wish they could just focus on something.
I think if they had, I think there's something to be said for the idea that if they had progressed in the trajectory that they set at this movie, that I would end up feeling like this was a good bridge to the rest.
It's not
of
an easy transition,
movies.
I guess.
But it's like a standard second movie that has all of the problems of 8,000 threads that never go anywhere without the movie that is supposed to finish it. So it just kind of ends up not really, this is going to sound harsh, not really having a purpose, because all of the juggling that it does is for nothing.
Well, I mean, for better or worse, X-Men 3 still is kind of an end. I think when we talk about X-Men 3, we'll have more.
It doesn't end any of the things.
No.
It's like Lost, where it sets up a whole lot of stuff and then chooses something else to end.
The Stryker through line gets its ending. I think there
are things that end,
the Phoenix
but there are
thread,
more things that don't.
The Phoenix thread and some of the character threads are a little worse for the wear, but I think the main humanity, Xavier Cerebro stuff gets done. That even if this one had bombed and they hadn't made another one, it'd be frustrating, but I still think
I guess then I feel like they just wasted their time on all the smaller stuff. Like yes, they wrapped up the main theme, but they still had
the smaller stuff we find in other things at times, the other movies. I think it's tricky because the first movie was rushed and so cheap. It's not a clean jump. Like it's a lot easier to go from Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 2, and even Batman Begins: The Dark Knight. But X-Men 1 is made for so much less money, and they're rushing to get it out so fast, and they're busy introducing so many things that it is a big jump. And even just because of the camera they use differently, it's a harder feel. That even if they had made 2 more films that were like X-Men 2, they would still feel very different from X-Men 1. Like X-Men 1 would still be good and important, but the 3 films would feel like nothing in common with the first one. You know, I can't...
Like...
In 2000, the idea of making a superhero movie that went past the 2-hour mark, I think, was
unheard of.
So I remember when this was starting to become a trend where movies were like 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 20 minutes. You're like, oh my gosh.
That's how old we are.
2003, that was like Terminator, Pirates, Matrix Reloaded. They were all like these big genre films that were getting longer runtimes. Like, I hope this is the future.
Yep.
And it was. It was, yeah. Return of the King laid the groundwork for that.
But let's go longer.
Yeah. Hey, I wrote poor Scott in my notes.
Oh, Scott.
So, poor Scott.
Poor Scott.
We'll say poor Scott again in the next film.
We'll just say poor Scott forever.
Yeah. All right, so that is X-Men. Oh, wait, no, that is X2. I always want to say X-Men 2, but it's not. It's X2, X-Men United.
X-Men United.
Even though it's Magneto and Mystique aren't X-Men, so they're not really united.
Yeah.
I remember there being so many different, like, title changes.
Yeah.
And at one point, it was just going to be X2. And they're like, you can't call it that. So,
but
yeah.
But I
remember going on a forum and being like, I can't wait for X2. And everybody was like, you mean Final Fantasy X2? I'm like, no. X-Men 2. X-Men United. Well, that has been our thoughts on X-Men 2. Join us on our next episode when we talk about the 90s animated series. And we're doing 2 episodes.
That's next week?
Yep. That's 2 episodes, a show. So we'll be talking about the 2-part pilot, Night of the Sentinels.
I'm excited to start the 90s animated series. I'm sad to have to watch Night of the Sentinels again.
Again, yeah. But now you get to watch it with the critical.
That's
the
true.
Critical, I have to talk about it on
true.
the podcast eye.
It's a different perspective.
So, but then that's how we'll do it with the 90s show. We'll just cover 2 episodes at a time, even if they're not part 1 and part 2. I'm Dust vs. Tweak everywhere online. Apart from this show and other shows on Radio Meanwhile, you can find me as the co-host on the All the Books show. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. Again, if you want to find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. And please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.